let's see here. Okay, so I want to introduce my colleague, Kristen Quinlan from DCF. And Kristen's here to help us. She's going to be the presenter and I'm going to moderate, but just a little bit about MEFA. We are a nonprofit quasi-state authority. And this webinar today is part of our guidance program, Guidance and Education. And we have a new program this year called the MEFA Institute. So all of you school counselors on the line, you'll earn 1 PDP point for this webinar. So be sure to, take advantage of the MEFA Institute. Because we're all remote this year, we're not able to see you in person to provide our annual trainings. So we do want to provide lots of webinars and virtual learning opportunities. All of our webinars are recorded, so you can watch a recorded webinar and download the evidence of learning form from our website. Whether you attend live or watch the recording, you can earn PDP points. And I'm in charge of that program at MEFA. So I want to encourage you to utilize that resource to gain professional development points for yourself. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Kristen Quinlan, and she is going to introduce herself, tell you a little bit about the organization that she works for, and she's going to present. So we will stop here and there for Q&A. So please, as we're going through this whole webinar, we'll save time at the end for questions as well. But if I see some questions coming in, I will stop Kristen just to do some Q&A here and there. So please send in your questions, type those in the Q&A feature, and we will answer your questions. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Kristen. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Stephanie, for having me. Hi, everyone. My name is Kristen Quinlan, and I am a program supervisor with the Department of Children and Families out of our Adolescent and Young Adult Services Unit at Central Office. I've been with the department, I just hit 20 years with the department, so it's been some time. And with most of that, I have been with working with the adolescent population, more specifically with the outreach program and providing education and post-secondary guidance for young people who are attending post-secondary education. So I just wanted to start talking a little bit about what I'd be going over today. Hopefully by the end of this session, you will know the post-secondary options for foster youth, that you'll be able to assist in accessing DCF supports for post-secondary education, and that you can identify and connect students to DCF staff to assist with that post-secondary educational planning. I will say, as we all know, COVID, the recent pandemic, we're working from home. I'm working from my living room now, and my hope is that my 2 children will stay upstairs during this training. But I also wanted to talk a little bit about the impact that's having in working with some of our students and what we've been doing as an agency to support them. In the spring, we had over 200 college students who were on campus, living on campus in foster care, and had limited places that they could go to during this time. And so we spent a lot of time working with different colleges and universities, foster parents, and different programs to ensure that they had food and housing security. And so we've been piloting that and moving forward with it and accessing and making connections this coming fall with campuses as well. And while we can't do a lot of in-person visits on campus, we've been doing a lot of virtual meetings, online meetings with students and staff at the universities, and providing ongoing support and training to the field as well on what options there are for transition age youth. So as I go through this slide show today and this training, I will talk a little bit more and incorporate some of the things that we've had to change given our current situation. And so please feel free to ask any questions as this goes along. If I don't have an answer to it, I will be able to respond to you at a later date. But hopefully I will be able to answer everything you have today. Okay. So just to get started, the Department of Children and Families really focuses on post-secondary education and career planning very early. Before our senior year, we work with youth on the Youth Readiness Support Tool. So youth in congregate care are all required to complete this, and it identifies long and short-term goals for them. And it also identifies a continued support system for them as well. And one of the really good things about this specific tool that they're working on is it identifies their lifelong connection or permanent connection that's going to be working with them on achieving these goals. Oftentimes I feel like a lot of people who are working with students, especially in foster care, they think the foster parent's going to be doing something, they think the guidance counselor is doing it, or they think that the youth is doing it, or a relative, a parent. And when everyone thinks that someone else is doing it, it's not getting done. And so this is a really good tool to be able to identify who that identified person is, to work with that person on that particular goal. And so we do have that youth readiness support tool that is reviewed and updated every 6 months and presented at foster care reviews to make sure the people who are working with them are held accountable. The PIA is a life skills training that we have, and we know that life skills are necessary to sustain one's education. So we start at age 14 and older, providing life skills training to all young people in care and custody and in care. The other thing we focus on is post-secondary messages and expectations at the department. It is not required for a young person to attend post-secondary education right when they graduate high school. They can remain open with the department and explore different career options and paths, or maybe take 2 classes. They don't necessarily have to go full-time. And we also want to take into account of what their social emotional needs are. Are they prepared for school? Did they get their GED? And do they need to maybe take a semester off or attend 2 classes where they haven't been in school full time? So we do explore those different opportunities with them and have conversations around that. And we also focus on the pre-SATs and SATs as well. And oftentimes I will refer young people back to the guidance department to look at waivers for costs for these, because our young people do qualify automatically, given that they are in the state's custody, to qualify for that waiver for the PSATs and SATs. Again, just other areas we focus on is making the right decision. The life skills training that we provide, the youth readiness support tool we provide, we include conversations around readiness and social emotional needs, like I mentioned, also what their academics look like. We research colleges and schedule tours with them. We will visit different institutions with them, talk about, where they feel comfortable. Is living on campus something they, want to do? Is go into a rural community or a city? What would it be like for a support system if you were to move outside your catchment area? We also talk about return on investment. I have lots of students, as we go through, you'll see some of the other things they're eligible for, but we have lots of students who still choose to go to a private institution and, may need to take loans or have a cash balance. And we have conversations around that so they can make the most informed decision. But we really want to talk and focus on what the return of investment is. We also access the career assessment or career centers, and we talk to young people about vocational training as well. We do have academic supports for young people who are attending vocational training or vocational institutions, not just college. Some of our programs do expand to be able to cover vocational training as well. So what is financial aid? I think a lot of you who are working in the field know what financial aid is. So this is just a brief overview. It's money to pay for college or career in school. College is not for free. And I think oftentimes young people in foster care get the message that they don't need to pay for college. I remind them that nothing in life is free. That there are grants that are available to them, loans, both federal versus private, work study and scholarships that are available to them as well. I think it's important here to really educate young people around, loans need to be paid back, and that there's applications for these, that, they have to meet certain deadlines, they have to apply for certain scholarships, they need to complete the FAFSA and things like that in order to qualify for this. And that it's not free. And that if they don't meet their deadlines or make these applications, that they will need to pay. And they also have to consider what is good for them. Is taking loans something that they can afford or do later on? And so we do a lot of those conversations as well. Different things that youth in foster care can apply for is federal student aid. We use the FAFSA website just like everybody else. And we refer students also to their high school guidance office for local scholarships, because while we do provide some funding for educational need, we also know that there are leftover balances or outside things that they may need as well. So we provide that with them too. School aid, we often will refer students back to contact their financial aid office at schools to be considered for additional aid. Sometimes when a financial aid package falls a little bit short, we will ask them to reach back out to appeal for additional financial aid at their schools and see if that's something that they can do as well. And then we have our DCF educational support programs, which I will really dive into as this moves forward. So just the FAFSA. So the FAFSA must be completed by all foster youth. I know we really encourage young people to complete the FAFSA for their educational needs, but they must complete it and meet the eligibility for financial aid in order to qualify for any of the DCF programs. And deadlines are even more important for foster youth. We focus a lot on them meeting those deadlines for the Massachusetts deadline for the FAFSA, which is May 1st. We talk to them about looking and seeing what their school's deadlines are, because those are often very different for financial aid than the Massachusetts one, especially if they're out of state or private institutions have different deadlines for the FAFSA. So we're really working with them to help them understand the difference between those. And those deadlines, like I said, are more important for us because it could be a matter of thousands of dollars that they will miss out if they don't meet the deadlines for not only the FAFSA, but some of the other educational scholarships and grants that we have. So we work very closely with MEFA and different institutions. Right now, what we're finding is that a lot of college campuses for youth that are already on campus and or planning on attending their school are holding different FAFSA days for them virtually. We just talked to Mount Wachusett Community College, and they have something through them that they are holding individual FAFSA application virtual appointments. UMass Dartmouth also holds them on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so they can email UMass Dartmouth to schedule a FAFSA meeting with them to help it get completed. So we do a lot with the institutions as well. And just because of the COVID, while they can't be in person, there are still lots of different resources available to young people to help them complete the FAFSA. Okay. On the FAFSA, what's really important for youth in foster care is that they can check off 3 different columns under the dependency status. The first one is that they turned age 13 since entering foster care. And a lot of our youth will have, that's like a default. A lot of our youth will go to that one. And that is one of the ones that we see utilized the most. The other one is I was a dependent or ward of the court since turning age 13 or an illegal guardianship. And the 3 of those are very different. And I just want to take a minute to explain the difference for you. The dependent or ward of court since turning age 13, that one is really for those young people who have been in foster care, are in the department's custody, and have turned 18 as a ward of the court. So it's through their 18th birthday. They remained in care and custody and placement with the department. The difference between that one and I was in foster care since turning 13 is sometimes you have a young person who went into foster care after the age of 13 and they returned home at 17. They would not be eligible to say they were a ward of the court through the age of 18, but they would be able to say that they were in foster care since turning 13, even if it was for a brief period of time. They can still check that off even if they went home. Okay. The other part of that is I was in illegal guardianship. And this is one that I see oftentimes through DCF sponsored guardianships where they turn 18, they may have been guardianed at 2, they could have been guardianed at 12 or even 17, but they were in a legal guardianship through their 18th birthday, supported through DCF. But I think for you all, it's also important to know that this could be a guardianship that moves maybe through probate court, where a grandparent went to probate court and got guardianship of a young person. And while we wouldn't be working with that particular student, they can still check off that they were in a legal guardianship, and the grandparents or guardian would need to provide documentation to the school to prove that.
Kristen, we do have one question related
Yes,
to
I
the slide.
thought we might. This is usually an area of questions.
And you kind of covered it, but I want to make sure I read the question to make sure we're answering it properly. Would you consider kids who are in legal guardianship to still be in DCF custody? Or is that just different for financial aid and college purposes? So if the student, yeah.
That's a good question. So it is actually different. So DCF custody is, and I'll get into some of the custody statuses in a minute, but a guardianship is very different. A guardianship means that permanency was achieved through the department through a guardianship, which is also different than adoption, and I'll speak to that in a minute too. It does bring up a very good point, because I was in foster care since turning age 13. We have young people who are guardianed or adopted. So we have people who are adopted at age 16 or 17. The adopted parents may not have planned, right, for financial education needs. And so if they check off that they were in foster care after the age of 13, but they were adopted at 16, they still can be considered an independent student. And that's the same for a guardianship as well. They would be considered an independent student based on both of those. What they wouldn't be eligible necessarily for is for some of our educational programs offered through DCF.
Okay. What if the student is currently homeless but is living with their parents, such as in a hotel or shelter? How does that work?
So if a young person is homeless, they do need to check off that they're homeless, correct? But if they were in foster care at any point and then were homeless, they really should check off the foster care on FAFSA instead of homeless, because you will need to prove homelessness every year, every time they apply for the FAFSA. But once they check off that they were in foster care, if they were, then that only needs to be proven once. So if they were homeless and never in foster care, they still need to check off that homelessness criteria. But if they had experienced foster care at any point between 13 and 18, they should be checking that off instead of the homelessness one.
Great. And I'll just ask the attendees, if you have questions, please type those in the Q&A, where it has a little Q&A bubble versus the chat, because it's just easier for us to manage the Q&A and be able to respond to you in the Q&A bubble versus the chat bubble. So I'm going to turn it back over to Kristen. Thank you. And we'll have more questions as we go.
Sure. All right. So just again, this is another slide just to kind of show what I was talking about earlier and how they can answer yes if they had no live-in parent, if they were in foster care, or if they were dependent or ward of the court. So, and this is true too, it says even if they're not today. So if you're working with someone who's on the older end, 21 years old, but they were a ward of the court or in foster care, they can still check this off as well. We do know that sometimes some people take a gap year or a couple before filling out the FAFSA. So if you are working with a student you may, have worked with in the past and they came back, they can still check that off as well. Recently added in 2018 was a question, a more specific question that asks if the youth was ever in foster care. If they answer yes, it's going to prompt up this nice little box, and it's going to tell them to contact their state ETV coordinator. That is my boss, Michelle Banks, who's our program director, as well as me. And that's really for young people to see if they qualify for the education and training voucher. This is good and bad, I feel like, because oftentimes I have to tell people that they're not eligible because they don't meet the eligibility criteria. It doesn't get into specifics here on eligibility, so I feel really bad about that. But the good thing about this is sometimes we do find young people who may not have realized they were eligible for ETV or additional educational programs offered by the department, and we're able to guide them a little bit more on that and provide additional support. So it is really good for them to reach out to us and to follow up if that is prompted on the screen. Which brings me to the different types of DCF care and custody. So the first is protective custody, and that is when we have custody of a young person because of abuse and or neglect, and we take protective custody of them. And that's important when we talk about eligibility as we go through some of our educational programs. The other one is child requiring assistance, or a CRA. And that is when the young person might have a petition filed on their behalf because of truancy or because of oppositional behavior at home or running away. And it's not considered protective custody, but it is a way that a young person can come into the department and be placed with us. The other one is adoption. And like I mentioned, young people can be adopted before or after 13. If they were adopted before 13, they cannot check off on the FAFSA that they were in foster care, but if they were adopted after 13, they can. Guardianship placement is another place, and that's typically what we see is someone who may have been in protective custody or CRA custody. Permanency is established through a guardianship petition. The department supports it, and we provide ongoing subsidy or guidance for those young people and their guardian. However, they're not considered an open case or having custody with the department any longer. And again, those can be through probate as well. What I'm speaking to today is more specific to DCF, but we do see those through probate as well. And then the last one is really a voluntary placement agreement, and that's our care piece. We do have young people who we may not get custody of that are placed with us voluntarily. More often than not, we see this when a young person turns 18, they become a legal adult and we can no longer have custody of them. So they often will stay on with the department and sign what we call a voluntary placement agreement, and it allows them to remain open with us up until the age of 22, sometimes 23, with the approval of an area director. Other types of possible independence when it comes to the FAFSA form and post-secondary education is probate, homelessness, runaway, or DYS. And while they are considered to be independent, it just looks very much different because they're not in the department's custody. And I can always help answer questions around those, but might need to refer you to one of the other, our partner sister agencies to be able to do it. Okay. So
Kristen,
DCF can, yeah.
Sorry, let me just interrupt real quick for a quick question. So if a teen is adopted before age 13, they are a dependent with their adoptive parents, but if they're adopted after 13, they're independent in terms of the FAFSA, correct?
Correct. And that will make a little bit of a difference too when we talk about eligibility for our programs on what they're eligible for through DCF as well. And I'll get into specifics around that for you all in the next few slides. Okay. So sometimes when they fill out the FAFSA, once they fill out the FAFSA, it takes 7 to 10 days for it to reach the school. The school then often wants verification of what they provided on the FAFSA is accurate. We can help with that. Oftentimes what they're looking for is a proof of custody award of the court letter, and that is something that the department can write. So if you have a student who is a ward of the court, we would write on our letterhead to whom it may concern, this letter is to verify so-and-so is a ward of the court through the Department of Children and Families. And this can be done at the social workers level. It can also be done through the outreach workers at the area office and or myself. And I have 2 ETV workers, education and training workers, that work at central office with me, and they can also assist with these letters as well. And this requires us to take a look at the case, which is why it is on our letterhead, and we will send it to the student. I can't send it to the school because of confidentiality, and then they need to turn it over to the financial aid office. I think sometimes this can be, young people, if they didn't ask for these letters, anyone would be able to check off that they were in foster care. And so this is really helpful for our young people who, who have had this service and have been in our custody and been in our care and need these additional programs. So, and it also, when we write these letters, brings attention to us on what students need and if they're eligible for additional educational programs with the department. And that kind of gives us a heads up of what the kids need post-secondary planning financially. Okay. So what happens next? Students receive their financial aid packages once the verification is done. We review financial aid packages with schools, and I think it's important for you all to review those as well as you're on the ground with them, taking a look at what these applications are, what the financial aid packages are, explaining the difference between grants and loans. What this doesn't include from the financial aid office is it does not include any of the DCF educational support. So oftentimes young people will, with the tuition and fee waiver, say they don't see it on their financial aid award letter, and they wouldn't at that point because the school may not know that they're receiving it. So it's important when taking a look at their financial aid packages that that aid has not been considered yet when taking acceptance into schools. Okay. The other thing here I just want to mention real quick is Mass Health. Health insurance is required on all Massachusetts public schools if they're enrolled full-time. Our young people who are in a guardianship or adopted and or in DCF custody receive Mass Health through the department. They are not required to take the school's health insurance and can waive the cost of that. And that cost is can range anywhere from $1,400 for the year to $2,000 that they can take right away off the bill. And so it's important that they're waiving that health insurance as they start school. And oftentimes they don't know that. So it's good to have that information when you're talking to them and doing some planning. That brings me to the DCF Financial Support. We have 3 different programs, and one that I utilize for students who don't qualify for the others, which is my 4th. We have the foster care child tuition and fee waiver, the adoption tuition and fee waiver, the foster child grant, my Massachusetts education and training voucher, which I call ETV. So if you hear me referring to that, it's an acronym of ETV, and then the William Warren Scholarship. The William Warren Scholarship, I'm not going to get into too much detail on. That is a competitive scholarship, and that's really for anyone who's ever touched foster care. So if they were in foster care when they were 2, and they returned home and they've been home, they can still apply for this scholarship. It is a much smaller amount and it is competitive. So I am only able to give that out to a certain amount of people per year, but they should apply for it. All of the applications for these DCF financial supports are on our website under dcfmass.gov, and that website is provided at the end of this training on one of the slides. Okay. So the first one is for the tuition and fee waiver, and there's 2 different ways that this can happen. If a young person is in our custody until the age of 18, and that would be that CRA or protective custody I spoke to, and they're unable to return home, and they're able to apply for the tuition and fee waiver. And they had to have been in care for at least 6 months. Okay. The tuition and fee waiver waives the tuition and fees to any Massachusetts public institution. So those are your Salem States, your UMasses, Westfield State, the community colleges that are Massachusetts public institutions. So it does waive the tuition and fees to those institutions. Another way that they can get this is adopted or guardianship. And if they're adopted, they can apply for one. And if they're guardianship, they can apply for one. And both of those applications are on the website, and it works the same way as the foster youth one. So this is where I was saying a young person who was adopted at the age of 2 or 6 months would be eligible for this adoption and tuition and fee waiver. They would only be eligible for this adoption, tuition, and fee waiver. They would not be eligible for the programs I'm going to speak to a little bit later. This does not waive any of the books or application fees or room and board. It's strictly the tuition and fees at the institution. And that doesn't include the application fee to the school. I often get emails or phone calls around that. That application fee is separate from the fees. And in order to be eligible for this, they have to be eligible for the FAFSA and receiving financial aid, okay? This can go until I said the age of 25, until their 25th birthday, and they can use it if they are part-time or full-time. All right. The good thing about the tuition and fee waiver, and I mentioned it, it waives the fees. And I think oftentimes people don't realize that. And sometimes we see young people who are eligible for the Abigail Adams Scholarship, That Abigail Adams waiver or scholarship, that particular waiver only waives the tuition portion. So at an institution like Bridgewater, it might only waive $455 a semester. They can only use one waiver. And so if they are eligible for the tuition and fee waiver and they're eligible for the Abigail Adams, they should be specific in letting the school know they want to use ours. With the tuition and fee waiver, they apply for it through the department. They're not automatically given the waiver. They will submit an application to us with a copy of their birth certificate or mass ID. We will approve the tuition and fee waiver, make sure they meet our eligibility requirements, and then it is mailed to the student. And it's the student's responsibility to bring that down to the institution. If they do not, the school will not know that they are eligible for this. And this happened just the other day. I had a deadline and a student came to me that day asking for the tuition and fee waiver. And because it wasn't processed in time, they missed out on it this semester and will receive it next semester. So it's really important that they bring that piece of paper down to the school. Okay.
Kristen, we just have a couple quick questions.
Sure.
Sorry, there's a little bit of feedback with my audio. So if the teen is already a freshman in college, so they start this semester, can they apply now for the fee waiver, or how competitive is it?
The fee waiver is not competitive. The fee waiver is automatic. So if a young person meets the eligibility criteria, meaning that they were in our custody for at least 6 months before turning 18, and that they were unable to return home, or if they were adopted a guardian, they are eligible for this waiver and they can apply for it. What will happen is, because it's past the deadline in which the institution needs to turn it into the Department of Higher Education, they may not be eligible for it for this semester, but they could receive it for the spring semester. They likely would also be submitted on a late list for this semester, and they might be able to get it, but I can't guarantee payment on that. The Department of Higher Ed actually pays this out. We just certify eligibility. Absolutely, they should still be reaching out to us and letting us know.
Okay, a couple more questions about this.
Yeah.
Is there a general turnaround time for when a student applies for the tuition and fee waiver to when they find out if they're eligible?
Eligibility, we can probably tell you within, if you emailed me or the student called me, I could probably tell you within 24 to 48 hours if they're eligible. However, given with COVID, this is one of the difficulties we have. Typically, there's about a 2-week turnaround for a young person to submit a application for it, and for us to process it, we have to have it notarized and all that fun stuff. And we send it back to the student. So that usually takes about 2 weeks. It is taking us a little bit longer because of COVID. And we are not fully in the office. We are working remotely, so it's taken a little bit longer for signatures and review of eligibility. However, if you have a question on a particular student, if you're with that student, or if the student's guardian or foster parents or themselves want to give us a call, I'm happy to go over eligibility ahead of time to make sure that they're eligible and to discuss what other options they may have. If the young person is at a particular school already, we do have those education and training workers, which I would have them reach out to one of them to talk about their eligibility and their financial need and see if they're able to access any of our additional programs as well.
Great. And another one, my audio is not doing well. If a student returns home at 17, are they ineligible for the tuition and fee waiver? Even if they had been in DCF for over 6 months? What if they signed out of DCF at 18 and then applied to college at 19?
So if the young person returns home before their 18th birthday, they are ineligible. And that is a common misconception with the tuition and fee waiver. A lot of people, think because they were in foster care, they're eligible for this. If they go home before their 18th birthday, they are not eligible, no matter how long that they've been in foster care. They still are eligible to check off in the FAFSA that they were in foster care and be independent, but they're not eligible for the tuition and fee waiver. If a young person turns 18 with the department and decides they don't want to go to school right away, but they don't return home and they're kind of working on their own, living with relatives, things like that, my recommendation is when they turn 18, apply for that tuition and fee waiver for when they decide to go to school. But if they decided at 19 or 20, I want to go back and I want to reach out and see what I'm eligible for, they can apply for it then. And we can take a look at their case status and have a conversation with them. They would be eligible for it as well, as long as they didn't return home.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. So the next one is the foster child grant. So the foster child grant is up to $6,000 per year based on need. It's typically broken up to $3,000 a semester. Youth are eligible up until their 25th birthday for this. This is a little bit more specific around the guidelines. They do need to be in DCF protective custody. So these CRAs, those adopted youth and guardianship youth, are not eligible for this. It is protective custody only. There is not a 6-month date on this. So if you have a young person who maybe came into care at 17 and 9 months, and they're not eligible for the tuition and fee waiver, they would be eligible for the Massachusetts Foster Child Grant. They do need to complete the FAFSA, as with the tuition and fee waiver. But this is unique in where they can use this at both private institutions and public institutions. Okay. So if someone is going to a private school and they can't use the tuition and fee waiver, they can access the foster child grant. They also have this in-state and out-of-state. We have young people who go to school in Florida, North Carolina, Arizona. They remain open with the department and they're accessing the foster child grant. Okay. This is a really good one. And the other thing I just want to mention on the foster child grant is this is an application that needs to be completed every year. I should have mentioned on the tuition and fee waiver that that's a one-time application, that once the school has it, it continues. But the foster child grant needs to be applied for every year. And we have a deadline of July 1st for that. So the social workers and outreach workers and students get an email typically in May to apply for this, and it has a July 1st deadline for the upcoming year. Okay. The last one I have that I'm going to go into detail is the education and training voucher. And while the other two programs we certify eligibility for, they are paid out in their state programs by the Department of Higher Education.
Kristen, sorry to interrupt.
No,
before you keep going. How much is the FCG?
It's $6,000 per year up to, based on need. So they also have to follow along the same cost of attendance. We can't exceed the cost of attendance, just like an institution can't exceed the cost of attendance when it comes to financial aid. So it's up to $6,000 based on need. Typically $3,000 a semester is what it is allotted.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So like I said, the education and training voucher, we actually pay this out through DCF. This is a federally funded program versus the other two, which are state funded. And like I mentioned to you earlier, I have 2 education and training workers. One is Anna Torms. The other one is Lori Hernandez. Both are at central office and they work with we awarded over 500 students education and training vouchers last year. So this is specific for youth who are in DCF custody until the age 18, not able to return home. They can access this program up until their 26th birthday. Okay. If a young person was adopted after the age of 16, they can also not only get the tuition and fee waiver, but they would be eligible for this particular program. If they were in a guardianship with kin, a blood relative, after the age of 16, they can also get this. So this is helpful for the young person who might have been guardianed at 16 and a half with their grandmother, and they can get the tuition and fee waiver. They can be an independent student and they can apply for ETV as well. And again, they must be eligible for federal financial aid and complete the FAFSA. This is up to $5,000 per year, and this is an application that they must complete every year. ETV funds can go towards public institutions, private institutions, vocational training that take the FAFSA as well. We have a lot of young people who go to barber school, hair salon school. They do, we have Elizabeth Brady, Catherine Hines, different institutions like that that take the FAFSA, where we're able to help support this. And it will first and foremost go to any type of cash balance. That's our priority, is to reduce the amount of cost for these young people while they're at school. The next thing it would go to would be their loans. And then after that, it can go towards housing, books and supplies, transportation, computers, and things to that nature. Again, it's up to $5,000 based on need. And so if a young person who's going to a school like Bridgewater State, if they're getting the full Pell Grant, they're getting the Mass Grant, they're getting the tuition and fee waiver and foster child grant, it's likely they have minimal need and no loans. And so we would be accessing the education and training voucher for something along the lines of books and supplies or transportation, because they wouldn't have that full $5,000 need. I think, any questions on those particular programs?
Yes, one. If these programs require successful FAFSA completion, are any of these programs, or are there other programs that undocumented youth can qualify for?
I was waiting for that question. So if you have an undocumented student, I would, unfortunately, don't meet the eligibility criteria for these particular programs. However, if they are in foster care and they're working with the department, I would highly recommend you reaching out to the area office social worker or outreach worker to see what resources they have in the community for those undocumented youth. We if a young person is in our custody through the age of 18, they should be working with someone on their legal status. And if we don't know that they're not here legally, and you do, we should know that as soon as possible. The sooner we know, the better we can advocate and connect them with the legal people to be able to apply for legal status. Oftentimes what I see is a young person might not be eligible because of their legal status right when they graduate high school at 18 or 19, but then they get their permanent residency or SIJ status at age 20. At that point, on their 20th birthday, they would become, when they get their legal status, even if they're at age 20, 21, 22, but they meet the criteria otherwise, they can apply for those at that age. So just because they can't access it at 18 does not mean they can't access it at the age of 19 or 20 when they receive their status. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, and one more. Are Christian Herder scholarship recipients who are in DCF able to apply for these programs as well, or can they only use just one?
That's another great question. So we have young people who use the Christian Herder scholarship and still receive all three of our programs. Depending on the school, what the need is would determine how much that is. And fortunately for us, the Department of Higher Ed manages the Christian Herder scholarship as well as the foster child grant and tuition and fee waiver. So all those calculations based on need and percentages are done through them. And then we do the education and training vouchers. So yes, they should be applying for all three programs if they're eligible for them. And if one of those programs can't be applied because they exceed the cost of attendance, that's something we can have a conversation about. And you might see the foster child grant be reduced a little bit rather than $3,000, maybe it's $2,500. But absolutely, they can still access our programs while receiving the Christian Herder. In fact, we have, I think, 2 students right now currently receiving Christian Herder while accessing our programs too.
Awesome. That's it for now for questions.
All right. So my next slide I just wanted to touch really quick with is DCF college support and programs. So not only through education and training vouchers, do we have those financial support programs, but we also like to provide additional educational needs to our young people. So we have a college fair every year. We like to say think college early. So the department hosts, usually in the Marlborough, Worcester area, it's a statewide event for young people to come and speak to colleges. We typically have about 33 schools, public, private, and vocational, as well as MEFA attends, and so does some of the TRIO programs that we work with. And they come and they meet with our students. And we typically have about 150 youth in foster care attend this college fair. And the feedback I get from the schools is great. They really, really enjoy our young people coming. They have lots of questions. They're well prepared. They bring their swag with them. We provide a lunch. really a great event. And we do hold that every April vacation, so it doesn't interfere with school, and it's usually from 11 to 1. This is the first time in the 9 years I've been doing the college fair that we did not have it because of the COVID. So I am, we did hold some virtual stuff, but I'm hoping that next year we're able to retain that. So if you had questions on that, please feel free to reach out to myself and I can get you more information on what's available. The other thing we do is we hold educational open houses statewide, and these are held at the area offices, typically in February, around February vacation, for students as well as foster parents and congregate care providers to basically review the programs, to talk about eligibility, to help with the FAFSA, to help guide a student and have those difficult conversations and inform them of what they're eligible for. And maybe take a look at different schools' financial aid award letters to see what they have to offer and if their school is affordable. We provide education and training support to providers as well, just like we're doing here today with MEFA. I also reach out to different area offices and providers in the community that work with foster care to ensure that they have the most up-to-date information as well. We do college advising days, or what we're now calling fall check-ins, and that has a lot of one-on-one planning and reviews with students. So we go to campuses. We just are finishing up. Anna is doing our last one this Thursday. We visited virtually 10 campuses, and we like to hit all the Massachusetts public institutions at least once a semester. Some of our higher ones, like we have, I think, 50 kids at Bridgewater. We have 39 at Salem State. So we like to make sure that we're in contact, and we go out and we meet with the students to talk about financial aid and education and training, return on investment, post-secondary, even planning after their post-secondary education, things to that nature. So we go out and we meet with them. And through those, we also make college connections with financial aid staff, student accounts and admissions and housing. We have a ton of relationships with different on-campus resources to provide. So when a student calls us because they're having trouble, we have one person we can identify to say, hey, go speak to this person at financial aid or housing. That way students don't have to tell their whole story all the time. We have people who work specifically with our young people. Often, times young people in foster care, when they go to college, they don't want to identify as a foster youth and have to tell their story multiple times. They've been doing it throughout their entire life. So it's great that we are able to develop certain connections on college campuses to refer these students to, so they don't have to go through that.
So quick question, Kristen.
Yeah.
For the foster care tuition waiver, does the child have to have been in DCF custody for 6 months? Or if they have been in legal guardianship, is that sufficient? They're just unclear on the requirement. Is it an and or an or?
So once they are established guardianship, the amount of time in foster care does not matter. So if they were guardianed, if the guardianship went through when they were 2 years old, they could have been in foster care for 1 day or 6 months. Same thing at 16 or 17, once that guardianship is established, because sometimes they do, right? So sometimes we have young people come into foster care, and then within, the next couple of months, they're living, they're placed with their grandparent, or they're placed with a friend of the family, and that guardianship moves rather quickly. I wouldn't say I see that a ton, but once that guardianship establishes, they do not, that 6 months in foster care is not applicable. The 6 month of foster care, a good way to remember that is when they turn 18, have they been in placement for 6 months? If they are guardian adopted, it does not need to be 6 months.
Okay, so if they are in a legal guardianship, that could be from a parent turning over custody without the child ever having been in foster care?
So that is, they would not be eligible for, so the DCF guardianship tuition and fee waiver is specific to DCF sponsored guardianship. So that comes back to that probate court I was talking about earlier, where the young person may be eligible to be an independent student, but they would not necessarily be eligible for our programs. And we see that quite a bit, where you might see someone who a parent was having a really hard time, they were struggling, the department did not become involved, or sometimes the department did become involved, but the grandparent or relative stepped forward through probate court and requested guardianship of them. In that particular case, if it was not a DCF subsidized or supported guardianship, they would not be eligible for the tuition and fee waiver. And those types of questions or eligibility, we can help answer for the student if they're looking at it.
Great.
It's
So
confusing.
I just want to make sure we get all the questions. It's related. I just want to make sure we're covering it. So this question is, what if a student is in guardianship but was not in foster care? Do any waivers or grants apply to them?
Not the ones that we have. I'm not sure. I sometimes will refer, they have some grandparent support groups out there, or there's the American Student Association. So ASA.org is another institution in downtown Boston. I believe they are out of Brockton as well. They do some case management and have assisted young people who may not, who might need additional information on different scholarships that are statewide. But as far as our particular programs, no, they would not qualify.
Great, thank you.
And this is just an example of one of the ways we connect with the campuses. And Salem State, what they will do for me is every semester, this one's a little bit dated, but every semester they send us an info sheet. And what they do is they identify specific people on campus who can be helpful, key dates for students, and they email it to us, and then we send it out to our students on campus. So that way, if they have a question on counseling services and they're really not sure how to, we're not working and they can't connect with us, they have Elisa Castillo's information to be able to contact on campus to access support. Okay. And we have these for a few of the different schools we work with, but it's just one way that we have connected with them to be able to provide information. And this leads me to my last little slide. And here's the information. The grants and scholarship information can be found on the Adolescent Services and Education page through the mass.gov website. And we do have the applications on there as well as the eligibility requirements. I know I spoke kind of quickly on them and I gave some few bullet points on them, but on this website, they do get a little bit more detailed, and there's a cheat sheet, if you would, on eligibility for these programs and information. It also has our contact information on there and who to send the applications to. But these are the important numbers, phone numbers for you to have. Myself and Anna and Lori, if you have any questions with a young person that you are working with, you can reach out to any of us and we'll be able to hopefully answer your question or at least connect you to the person at the area office if it's a young person who's open that they can work with.
Excellent. So I know we have a couple more slides, but I just want to give a shout out. If you have any Q&A, just type them in here. And I have a couple slides as well. So Kristen, they're just looking for emails, so we can send that out, your email address. So we can actually, okay, go ahead, you answer.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's funny that you say that, because as I was going through the slide, I just looked at it. So the best way to email us would be there for my first name. So for instance, it would be Kristen .Quinlan at mass.gov. And that would be the same. Anna is actually Anna.Torms, not Maria, but Anna.Torms at mass.gov, and Lori Hernandez would be Lori.Hernandez at mass.gov. And Stephanie, I can get you those emails if you want.
Yeah, we can actually update this slide with the emails. And so when I send out the recording with the PowerPoint slides, it'll have all of your emails in there. So folks don't have to worry about writing them down. So I do have a question here. Can you advise on the best way for a student to locate paperwork regarding a grandparent being given guardianship?
So I would first say reach out to me and let me see if it's a DCF supported guardianship or what the status is, because sometimes I think young people can get a little confused. I oftentimes have young people who are in a guardianship that, think it's foster care and vice versa. So reach out to me or have the student reach out to me and let me see what their status is. They might be eligible for something, or they may have been in foster care and not known that they were at one point. If I can't provide them with any information, the best way for them to find that out would be through the probate court. If the grandparent is alive and saying that they have guardianship, it's public record and should be able to access that through the probate court of where they live.
Okay, great. And so we're still waiting to see if more questions are coming in, but we can go to the next slide.
Okay.
So just a quick reminder for everybody to connect with us on social media. Whenever we have trainings or, scholarship alerts, things like that, we'll be sending out tweets and Facebook events, things of that nature. Recordings of all of our webinars are on our YouTube channel, as well as on MEFA.org under events where it says MEFA videos, and you can watch those MEFA Institute videos to earn professional development points as well. So definitely connect with us here. And we can go to the last slide while we see if anybody has any other questions. And then for all of our school counselors on the line, here is our 800 number at MEFA. So if you have questions about the financial aid process, a specific question about a student filling out a FAFSA, whatever it might be, stuff comes up all the time. Feel free to call us or email us at collegeplanning@mefa.org. And we actually had a great webinar last week with a panel of college financial aid administrators about unique financial circumstances. So that was really helpful. I would encourage you to watch that one and earn another PDP while you're at it. And of course, we're always looking for good Google reviews. So please leave us a note there if you have any great feedback for us. And with that, I'm just going to leave the webinar open for another few seconds to see if anybody has any more questions. I don't see any right now, but I just want to give you a chance to type them in. And while I'm waiting to see if anybody has Q&A, I just want to thank you, Kristen, for joining us today. It was, as always, awesome to provide this great information, for our neediest students that we all want to protect and assist. So thank you so much for joining us today.
And like I said, just to reiterate, anytime you have a question or unsure, if you're working with the youth in foster care, please reach out to us. We would be glad to help. And if we can't answer the question or can't do anything, connecting you to the person who can.
Awesome. Okay, I don't see any questions coming in, just comments about how great this was and how helpful and what this webinar was, and thanking you for joining us today. So
awesome. Thank you all for having me.
You're welcome. All right, so I'm going to end the webinar for everybody. So thank you all. Have a great day. Enjoy what's left of this gorgeous afternoon. We have about an hour and a half before sundown. So get out there and try and enjoy it. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Kristen.
Thank you.